So today I'm excited that we have Keir Mclaren with us, and I discovered you on the internet on YouTube, and I watched a video of Future, and it was very inspirational to me. So I see that you have lived quite a journey and reinvented yourself many times, and that's kind of what I'd like to talk about today.
Sure. I'd love to talk about it.
Yeah. Now, I also do want to learn a lot about how you have ended up working through everything that you've gone through in your life. You've ended up working with Emmy Award winners, Oscar Award winners, Sony Entertainment Pictures. You've been published in Harper's. Amazing accomplishments. But I've kind of like to start from the beginning because the videos I was watching, you kind of said that kind of helped shape and mold your mindset, which seems to be pretty interesting to me. So you grew up in Pittsburgh. Tell me a little bit about how that kind of shaped you.
I did grow up in Pittsburgh. I actually grew up in a suburb of Pittsburgh called Oakmont. If anyone's a golfer out there, they'll know because probably the most famous country club in the world is located there. And it was kind of an interesting town. It was half a steel mill town. It sat on the river. And then the upper half of the town was sort of, upper class management and those kinds of people with money. Let's put it that way. I grew up in a family. My father had gone to an Ivy League college and all that, but we didn't live in the upper part of town. We lived in the lower part of town. So I got to see right from the get-go sort of the difference between being born into a family that had a lot and being born into a family of basically children of steelworkers. I also got to see the country club life. And at that time, that particular country club, like most of them, did not admit Black, Italians, Jews, just go down the list. And that always bothered me. So Pittsburgh's kind of a tough town. It has that reputation, and I think it's well earned. It's a kind of what you see is what you get. Your word is your bond, and what you say makes a difference. So I kind of learned all that. My home life wasn't particularly great for lots of reasons. So I kind of took to football. Football was very big in Western Pennsylvania in those days. I think it still is. Joe Namath came from there, Joe Montana. There's a whole list of people that came out of there. And I wasn't a terribly good athlete, but I was smart and I worked hard. And back in those days, people believed that if you lifted weights, you would kind of like become muscle bound. It was kind of a crazy world back then. But I did everything I could to be good, and I got to be a much better football player than I was an athlete. And my goal then was to play in the NFL. Basically, what appealed to me about the NFL was you only worked about 4 months out of the year. And I thought, no, there's the life.
Yeah, that sounds
right. I never really thought much about careers or anything like that, and I was really smart, but I didn't do well in school. I barely got out of high school. So when I graduated from high school, I wanted to go play for one of these, football factories actually out west here. I had friends that played at Arizona and Arizona State. My parents weren't wild about that. And so I went to a prep school that doesn't exist anymore up near Syracuse. And I did a PG year for one of these places. They're still around. That's got a class of just basically athletes. So I played with some really great athletes at that time. And then I went to college. I went to Kent State University basically because it was close to my home and I had a girlfriend and that sort of thing. And after the first year, I realized that there were just like a lot of guys there that were better than me. I mean, we had as it turned out on that team, 11 guys were drafted into the NFL. One guy was a #1 draft pick. And I left there and I worked for about 6 months in a TV station. And then I loved that because every office had a TV in it, and I said, wow, this is pretty cool. I went to the South. Down, I'm guessing you're from Marietta or somewhere like that from your
Atlanta. Mm-hmm.
I went actually to Chattanooga, Tennessee on a football scholarship. I was one of those guys that just drifted, And I went down there, and that was in the late 60s, and the South had just really been started to be integrated. And I saw a lot of things that, were pretty upsetting. In my opinion, at that time, you had a choice as a Northerner either to join in that culture or to oppose that culture, and I chose to oppose it.
Good for you.
So, and it was a tough time down there for lots of reasons, lots of demonstrations, and lots of things going on. And so I started an SDS chapter at my school. There were 5 of us. They thought there were 500 of us. That was a sort of semi wannabe radical organization at the time. And I learned to stand up. I mean, you just had to stand up to what was going on, and I learned that. But also at the time, probably more importantly, I went to work in the inner city working on playgrounds. And I ended up working for the Boys Club. I ran a camp for OEO. I mentioned that to a woman in the business today, and she didn't know what that was. It was called the Office of Economic Opportunity. Probably the most famous program that came out of that was Head Start, which still exists, and the Job Corps, which still exists. And so I learned a lot about it was easy for me because I came from Pittsburgh, and on the streets you just kind of tell the truth, and you learn how to stand up for yourself. And I learned a lot there. I came back to Pittsburgh, and I went to work for the Job Corps. And there I ended up being, we had 200, I call them kids. They were men 16 to 22. It was a tough crowd. And it was a residential program, and I was in charge of them from when they got off of school at 4 until the next morning, and then all weekend. So I had like 30 some employees, and I was responsible for the all the stuff. The best thing, there was a lot of good things about that place, but one of the best ones for me is, as it turns out, I know this is about how you change and changing careers. Every place I was, whether it was football, the OEO, the Job Corps, I always learned as much as I could, and I never worried kind of about how it might or might not pay off. I think the Pittsburgh culture is, you give 100%. If you don't like it, you give your notice and you leave, but you don't just sit around and take the guy's money. One of the best things about that, it was the Job Corps that I worked for was operated by Teledyne in conjunction with the Department of Labor. And they did a lot of training, and I learned a lot about business from those people. I didn't realize how much I'd learned, but they would have trainers come in and train you how to do things. I'd never heard of any of that, that kind of stuff. So during that time, I was writing on the side. I decided to leave there because, someone said you could end up being the director of a center someday, and I realized I did not want to be the director of a center. I wasn't sure what I wanted, but I knew I didn't want to do that.
So as you saw your career path kind of going up there, like, oh, wait a second, this is kind of getting deeper than I wanted to be in.
Yeah.
How old were you during that time, and how long did you stay with that? I was
probably 23 or 24. I'm not good at times and ages, but I think I was somewhere around there. Plus, I had always said to myself, if I ever have a child, I'll get out of this business, because a lot of people that I knew that did have children, it's pretty hard to be a good parent and go through the kind of stress and issues that you go through when you're dealing with people, young people from those neighborhoods. Because, the issues, I remember once a guy came up to me in the bar and said, I know that you work with kids and these tough kids, and my kid has a problem and I want to talk to you. I said, absolutely. And he said, he got an A-. And I said, hey, buddy, look, be lucky he came home alive tonight, because those are the issues I'm facing. And, basically don't bother me with your petty problems. I was kind of a jerk, I guess. So I had a daughter, and so I knew I had to get out. First of all, it was dangerous work. And second of all, it was all consuming. And I would have had no time to be much of a parent, So my father had passed away, and my mother had relocated to New Hampshire, where I was actually born and she was from. My brother and sister went up there, and I decided to relocate up there to be a writer. At that point, I'd already sold an article to Harper's, just over the transom, if you know what that means. I just submitted it, and it was funny. I'd submitted to a bunch of other people, and I had pink slips. I had probably 300 or 400 of them, and I got a call from them, and they'd actually bought the article. No one was more shocked than me.
Yeah.
I think they actually thought it was about a country called Burundi, and it was a satire. I think they actually thought I'd been there, and I didn't tell them any different,
Well, one thing that I'm kind of intrigued by is that you're thinking of the future. You have a child, and you're like, well, I can't do this job. It's going to be too dangerous. I got to find a more stable career. And then you decide to become a writer, which that doesn't necessarily add up to me in my head of like, oh, that's a good solid career to raise a kid. How did you decide that?
I think I'm not being clear. I've never looked for a stable career. I've just looked for a different career.
Okay.
I never worry about that part. I mean, I always figured that I was smart and I'd figure it out. So I've always taken pretty big chances. I mean, what other people would consider pretty big chances, I don't consider them as such. So when I went to New Hampshire, I just needed a job. So my brother was already there, and I got a job working at the front desk of a big resort hotel, and it paid the bills, and it allowed me to write. I didn't make much money from Harper's, and I realized I couldn't really, make a living doing that. So I tried to write a novel, which I was terrible at. And I was getting tired of working at the hotel. And then a local radio station had an opening, and I happened to have, then you needed, it's called an FCC third class license, and I had one. Never worked in radio, and I applied for the job. And I only tell you this because it's probably germane to what you're doing. My license had elapsed, and it was just a matter of renewal, but I had to have the license to work. And the guy asked me if I had one, and I said yes, and I immediately applied to get it replaced. And it literally, I made up my mind that I was going to get this job no matter what. And I had my old license. I was going to change the date if it didn't come. It came, I went to work at 4 o'clock. It came in the 1 o'clock mail.
Wow.
So I've always found that things happen that are supposed to happen. But you got to be in the game.
Mm-hmm.
You can't be sitting home. So I did that for about a year. And then I got into sales as well as being on the air, and I realized there was money I needed to make more money now. I had a wife and a child. I did that for like a year, and then I decided to go into the ad agency business, which I knew nothing about except that there was writing involved. And so if anyone knows the ad business, I didn't know what a column inch was when I opened it. But it was okay. I did okay in that business, and I built it up.
Now, when you're saying I decided to go in the ad business, you're not saying I went to work for somebody. You started your own business.
Yeah, right. The only reason I did is I saw the copy that the ad agencies were sending to the radio station, and I said to myself, I can do better than this. I didn't know anything about print. As it turned out, probably 70% of what I did in my ad business was print advertising. I didn't know anything about that. But I didn't realize I didn't know anything about that. I didn't realize how important it was, so I just soldiered on, So I did okay in that. I built it up.
Well, I'd like to talk just about that a little bit. You're like, I just started a business. I mean, this is kind of what a lot of people would probably want to be able to do. It's, you gloss over like it was kind of easy. I'm just going to start a business. I don't know anything about it. I mean, what were some of the steps you took to even get a client and figure out that you could make money off something like that?
The first thing I did, I always had good relations with, like when I was in the radio business, I had really good relations with all the other people in the radio business. And so what I did was, I'm trying to be fair here to everybody and not gloss anything over. I said to myself, what I need is some clients. So what I'll do is I'll take some clients with me. In other words, I won't hurt the radio station because I'm not going to work for another radio station. But I talked to clients and said, and I knew they were frustrated with the local newspapers because in those days, small retailers were using the newspapers to do their ads. And so I talked to them. I had a number of people that I talked to, and I said, if I go into this business, would you be willing to have me do your work? And they said, sure, because I did good work for them and I wrote their commercials. Then I had another client that was a fairly successful car dealer, and I said, I want to do this, but I don't have any money. If you'll partner up with me and front the money, I'll do your work for basically nothing. And they said, okay. So what I did was, and maybe this is more important than I think, I had resources and I knew it. It wasn't like I just, landed from LA and said, hey, I'm going to start an ad agency and I know nothing about it. I did have resources, and resources are generally people and contacts, at least in my life. So I didn't just jump off the bridge. I had enough people set up the day I walked out door A to take care of me, at least for the short haul, in choice B, which was the ad business. Nice.
So you intelligently jumped off the building.
Yeah, I did. I didn't really do a lot of research or do a lot of, I'm pretty much of a people person, and I knew I've always had confidence that I can figure stuff out. And I've always been pretty good about seeing talent. And a guy that I did business with owned a small weekly newspaper. And he had a problem, which was he had a staff that sat around all week doing nothing as far as creating ads. So I would say for the first 5 years, the print ads he did for me. I hired them to do that work because I didn't know anything about it and they did. Years later, I had my own department, and years later, he and I went into a partnership in doing some marketing. But I've been pretty lucky in choosing good people, always choosing good people. And I usually choose on character, not on anything more. I mean, you have to be competent.
Yeah, sure.
But if a person has character, I'm willing to take a chance. The other thing is, I learned, at the Job Corps, I can't do it all. I need good people. So I've always been willing to, like, you've seen me on Chris Doe's Future thing. He was a client of mine for over a decade, and he and I partner up on a few things. He's just a good person. To me, that's the beginning. That's Pittsburgh. It's the beginning of it and the end of it for me. So I did that for a while. And meanwhile, I should say, I had all sorts and still do all sorts of personal issues. Raised in an alcoholic household, all the insanity that comes from that. So I was always a big risk taker, and I always had that little element of self-destructiveness in me because I was always looking for my work to fix me, to make me feel okay. People always ask me, why didn't you keep writing for magazines? And I said, because when I finally got the magazine and I opened it up and I thought I would now feel pretty good about myself, I still felt lousy about myself. So then I had no interest in it anymore because it couldn't fix me. My business was the same thing. So I had a lot of clients that were very successful financially, real estate developers, good people. And I rolled the dice every time. It's like Texas Hold'em. I pushed all my chips in every time. And when the recession came and they changed the laws about condos, which I won't bother people with, I was ready to go out of business because I had risked everything. And in the end, you keep gambling like that, you eventually lose. And I basically lost. So I bankrupted my ad business. I bankrupted my marketing company. When I say that, I went through bankruptcy. I kept my house, sold it off. Meanwhile, back at the ranch, it was great success. I'm sure this will have the clients flocking to me,
This is great.
I had done some interviews for my friend that owned the newspaper, and I interviewed Donald Hall, who was a well-known poet, but not well-known to me. He later became the poet laureate of the United States.
Oh, wow.
And he lived in a little country. He had inherited his grandparents' home, little farm that wasn't really a working farm in this little town near where we lived. I lived in rural New Hampshire in the middle of the state. So he said, would you interview this guy for the newspaper? And I went, yeah, I guess so, So I went down and talked to him. He's kind of a curmudgeonly guy. And he was saying that it was only in the last year or so that he could make a living from his writing. He basically, like a lot of, pretty good writers, they lecture at the university. They teach at the university and they do lecture gigs. And I said, oh, that's interesting. He said, there's only about 200 writers in the world that can make a living from writing. He said, except those SOBs in Hollywood who write screenplays. And a light went off in my head. I'd never thought of that. So I did the interview and I wrote it up and so on. And I don't think I did a very great job of it. But what I did was I went to Boston and started taking classes in screenwriting because I wanted to learn how to do this.
Right.
So I did it and I did it and I did it. And, I think I got decent at it. And I would take classes. And once I came to LA, the first time I'd ever been to LA, and I took a class, UCLA then and UCLA now has what I would call a night school. They call it the Extension. And they have like the greatest teachers in the world because all these people that write for television and movies, a lot of them teach a class there. It's really great. So I'd recommend anyone out there who wants to try to be a screenwriter, do that. It's cheap. So I needed an agent. I'm telling this story because it shows you what kind of craziness.
Yeah, this is crazy. And what I'm thinking, and I hope I'm not overstepping, are you bringing the family out there, or are you going by yourself?
Well, no, at first I just went back and forth. Then eventually, when I sold my house in New Hampshire, I moved to Harrisburg. Oh, this is an interesting story. I moved to Harrisburg my brother lived there. My brother was always good to me, and he had worked for me and, so on and so forth. And so I went there and I got a job with a company called the Wolf Organization. Again, one of the best, probably the best place I ever worked when I worked for other people. I did marketing and advertising for them. They had an in-house ad agency at the time. They had 3 partners, and it was the second oldest continually family-owned business in America. I think they'd been in business as a family since like 1846 or something like that. And one of the partners, Tom Wolf, is now the governor of Pennsylvania. So they were pretty smart guys. And I learned, again, a lot about how to run a business for them. And I want to give them credit because one of the things they did that I'd never seen, I was always kind of anti-business, I was kind of a leftist. They were like fiscally conservative, but, they were socially liberal. I hope they don't mind me saying that. Tom will probably choke me when but what they did was they had 33 retail lumber stores in the 5 mid-Atlantic states and a couple big wholesale operations. And what they did was everybody, the managers, was bought into the company and everybody shared in the profit and the loss. And the managers were like made responsible. I don't want to bore your audience, but what I learned there was you can run a business and you can make money and you can do well and you don't have to like oppress your employees. You can treat them with dignity. You can give them opportunity. And every manager there, some had college degrees, some who didn't. They did very well financially, and they were the greatest guys in the world, and I saw it firsthand. And I've taken a lot of that to my new work. So I get lost in my own story. So anyway, so in those days, if you wanted an agent, there was like this list. Now everything's online, but you could get this thing. And they all had a statement that went something like this, that they weren't taking any new clients unless they were recommended by someone who was known to them. It was kind of one of those formal statements, and I don't have it exactly right. Well, of course, I didn't know anybody in Los Angeles. So the person who wrote Trading Places and a number of other movies that I really liked, I looked up and saw who his agent was. So I wrote him a letter that went something like this. I lived in ski country near Waterville Valley, if anyone knows the skis in the East Coast. And there was like not many gas stations. And there was this gas station owned by this guy, Terry, and his dad. And they were both like real characters, good guys, but characters. They were always bickering, father and son business. So I wrote a letter to this guy saying, dear whoever, I know you're only taking people that are, known to you, And I know that you're probably a skier. I read somewhere that you ski, so you've probably skied Waterville Valley, so you've probably gone to Terry's gas station. And, you know, and I went on this long, funny thing about Terry, and, you know, funny he is and what goes on. So since I do know somebody that's known to you, would you consider looking at one of my scripts? And I'll never forget this. He sent me back my own typed letter, and on the corner he wrote, "Okay, fucker. Something funny, send me your script."
That's pretty cool.
Now, he didn't take me as a client, I will admit, but again, I learned that there's games to play, and you have to play. I mean, you got to pay attention. You can't just give up, you know? So I didn't give up, and I tried. And then I took a class in Boston. UCLA sent a crew around the country. Screenwriting was very popular then. Everybody and their brother wanted to be a screenwriter. And I took a class, and an older fella whose father had written for Yiddish theater. This guy was already retired from the TV business. I met him, and he and I hit it off, and we had a few drinks, and he said, "Look, if you want to do this, you have the talent, but you got to go to Los Angeles. You can't really do it from here. If you're going to write movie scripts, yes. If you're going to write sitcoms, no." So I talked to my then wife, and she didn't want to go to LA. And after all I'd put her through, I wasn't going to drag her to LA. About 6 months in Harrisburg, she said, "Let's go to LA." Yeah. So I took more classes, and I met some people, and I found a writing partner, and I knew a producer, and a producer knew someone needed a script like the one I'd written in New Hampshire. I knew there was something wrong with the script. I write funny scenes, but I'm not great at story. Any writer out there will know what I'm talking about. And so I teamed up with this person who was really well known, and I'll give him a plug. His name's Lyman Ward. He's probably most famously known as the father in Ferris Bueller's Day Off.
Oh, okay.
He'd been in Second City. He made over 100 comedy movies. He knew comedy. And so I said, "You want to help me with this script?" Because I basically have someone who's thinking of buying it, but there's something wrong with it, and I don't know what. So we worked on it. And we got an option, which means absolutely nothing. It means someone pays you money for the right to see if they can sell it. But we made money. And again, for me, it was the same thing. I remember the day that we got an option. My life, I was divorced now. I was making no money. I had an old beat-up car that hardly got anywhere. And Lyman was doing, sometimes when they do a movie, the sound gets messed up, and you've seen it in movies. They go into a sound stage, and they've got to revoice their own. And it was like Burbank. It's like 100 degrees in the summer. I mean, I'm dying. I just came from New Hampshire. And we got the word that the script got options. And I remember sitting on the curb in Burbank thinking, I still feel crappy about this isn't fixing me. So more happened in the script business. The movie never got made, and that was fine. We made a little bit of money, not a bunch. And at that point, a friend of mine said to me, "You seem to know a lot about business. Would you see if you could help me with my business?" And I went, "Yeah, okay." I mean, I never really thought of that. Never occurred to me. So I did. I helped him, and then he would recommend me to other people. And at one point, I was recommended to a designer whose wife was also a talent agent, who then recommended me to a CPA in Brentwood, probably most famous for where OJ allegedly killed his wife, very upscale part of LA.
Sure.
Who was a CPA and a business manager for people in Hollywood. He recommended me to a client that I do business with today, a client called Keslow Camera, who's like now the second largest. They rent cameras to the TV and movie industry. Probably Panavision is probably the only company bigger than them. And then from there, I just kept getting recommended. So I've never advertised, I've never marketed, I've never really done much but show up and do my job, And I do tell people when I'm looking for business that I am looking for business. I will say to my clients. But most of my clients have always been, like Chris Doe is a good example. I mean, He's enormously successful. If those of you that don't know, he's won an Emmy. He's enormously successful, and he's an enormously great person. And he always, whenever he's interviewed, he tells people that I am responsible for a great deal of his success, which I think I'm responsible for a little bit of his success, but not the gigantic amount that he's had. I've been a contributor to his success. So most of my clients honestly feel that way, and they'll tell people about me. So, you know, that's how I, quote, built my business. I didn't build my business. It kind of built
you, which is great, but it seems like you really love it. Now I have a couple of questions.
I'm sure.
Yeah, exactly. So you're helping these Emmy Award winners, Oscars, ad agencies like Juniper Jones, and what are you doing for them? How are you helping them? What is the help?
That's a good question. It's sort of like the six guys and blind guys in the room and the elephant. You know, like for each person, I do whatever they need. Here's the way it used to work. Before the 2008 recession, or whatever we're calling it these days, what happens is a lot of creatives go into business and they have a lot of talent and they build their business to a certain point. And then it starts to get too big and they start to understand that they don't really know what to do anymore. Here's the way, honestly, I used to get all my business in 2005, 2006, whatever. A guy and his wife would be at a cocktail party. My client's wife would be there. Most of the time, I didn't know my client's wife. The wife of someone else would say to her, you know, I'm ready to leave my husband because the guy's never home. And I'm tired of it. I'm tired of, you know, raising two kids and I never see this guy. And they were all in the creative businesses because, you know, they hang out together. Mm-hmm. And the wife of my client, who I didn't know, would say to this wife, you ought to have your husband call this guy that helps my husband because he's organized him enough that my husband is actually home on weekends now, gets home before 10 o'clock at night. I would tell you, in all honesty, Peter, for 5 years, that's how I got all my business. That.
Wow.
So when I go in, every client that I work for, what I think I do, but I don't call it that because it's got such a bad name and I have a bad taste about it, is I coach people. In other words, everyone that I have is smart. It's like the Wizard of Oz. They know what to, but they have something that's getting in the way and they have to change. And change is like the most difficult thing that anybody does, myself included. And so what I do is encourage them and try to create space where they can change, where it's not too scary for them. Because I have this little analogy I use, but it doesn't really make any sense to anyone but me. I picture a clock at like 6 o'clock, you know, where the hour hands at the 30. And I always figure my clients are looking at the world from that space. If I can get them to 6:35 and just look at the same world from a different angle, they'll begin to see what they need to do. Most of us don't want to change, and we're afraid to change, and we're very bad at seeing opportunity. So to jump forward right now, I would say 3 or 4 years ago, most of my clients were in some version of the motion graphics business, which for those that don't know, it's animation, stuff that moves on the screen. Some combination of that and live action, which is when someone shoots, like you're doing now, shoots me on film. Because of the advent of the internet and tech, most of my clients survived or made a lot of money through advertising dollars, either those spent by advertising agencies or those spent by broadcast networks like ABC or CBS, HDTV and all of those. But as more and more of the audience went to the internet, it was and is continuing to be less and less money available for broadcast television, which also affects ad agencies. So that marketplace is going away. And it's accelerating. My clients have to switch and find other markets for their services, which for them is basically business to business. Because most companies today, most big companies have what amounts to a creative shop in-house because they have to generate so much content for the internet. and so much digital content. And the truth of the matter is, nobody has any idea what that really means. If you ask 10 experts in digital, you get 10 separate answers. So what I do today more than anything else is try to let them see opportunity. There is opportunity, but it's hard for them to see. I tell this story. If you've ever had Economics 101, it's famous. They tell you this, but who knew 30 years ago when I heard this story it would become so useful? When the automobile came along, the people who made carriages had all the market share. There was no other market share. None of those people went into the automotive business. None of them. They all went out of business. The only company that remained at all was Fisher Body. I think Ford uses that tag. Why was that? Because they could not see that the market had changed. They had the customers. All they had to do was buy out Olds or buy out the Dodge brothers or buy out Ford or buy out somebody. They had the market. They lost it. That's where my customers are today. They have the skill set. They know how to do the work. They have to switch the audience that they serve. If they don't do that, they won't survive. It's just that simple. And here, the biggest example of that is what's called special effects. It's stuff blowing up, stuff that you see in Star Wars. 90% of that business today is done abroad, particularly in India. Why? Technology allows them to do it, and labor is cheap. It's just, labor's cheap. Mm-hmm. Capital goes to cheap markets. And so that's kind of what I do today in a nutshell. And I've got some really good customers and really good clients. Juniper Jones is one of them. He was out here. Kevin Robinson, if anyone's looking for spectacular work, he's filming for one of these big high-tech companies that's gone into the real estate business and what they call disrupting the whole market. And he's out here shooting film for them for ads, digital, and all that stuff. I don't know if that answers your question.
No, it's very interesting stuff. And so a couple of things that I'm thinking, which are kind of like two unrelated topics. But the first one is, so you're doing this, you find you kind of have this gift for helping people, see where they need to go in their business. And so after you do that, how do you figure out how much you charge for that? Because it's not like I'm going to give you one widget and it costs this much money. You're charging for kind of like your ideas to give to them. How do you do that?
I charge as a consultant. I charge a monthly fee, and most of my clients I'm with for 4, 5, 6, 8. Christo, I worked for it for 12 years. I mean, because people need, I use the example out here. It's like when Phil Jackson coached the Lakers. They paid him $7 million a year. If the Lakers didn't need coaching, they wouldn't have paid. I mean, I don't care how talented you are, you need coached. And that's what I basically do. I mean, you can't just, Shaquille O'Neal and Kobe Bryant clearly knew how to play basketball. So it couldn't have been about that because they had a coach before they didn't even have a winning season. Getting people to do what they need to do on a consistent basis is not easy, and it takes time. And it's not something like you can have, I can't go and meet with someone for a week and tell them what to do and leave, and I don't do that, even though people want me to do it, because it doesn't work. What works is some kind of regular, because the issues change, everything changes. We're in a really fluid world. And these people need advice on what to do and how to make decisions, and that's what I do. So that's how I do it. And I charge a fairly high rate.
Yeah, good for you. And so when you're doing this, they're like, okay, I need a coach. I know I need a coach.
I need a business consultant.
I need a business consultant. Yeah. I need a business consultant. And so what does that get me with you? Is it that I can call you anytime? Is it that I talk to you from 10 to 11 on Tuesday? What does that mean?
Generally what it means is, and it's changed a little bit over the last few years. Generally, if you're in LA, it means we meet basically once a week for somewhere around an hour. Sometimes I stay 2 hours. I don't worry about it. If it's on the phone, which I do a lot of work now on the phone because so many people that don't live in LA, like Kevin Robinson, I've worked for him for over 6 or 7 years now. He's in Dumbo, the creative part of Brooklyn. So we see each other a couple times a year. When he comes here, I go to New York. Some people I've never met in person, just never met them. So it's an hour, and then approximately, then you can call anytime with a problem. And some people never call, and some people call a lot. You know, it's just like within a month or two, as I say to my clients, I'll know more about you than your therapist, your significant other. I mean, we have to be able to know what's getting in your way. What is it that needs to be done to get you where you want to go? So that's kind of how it works.
That's pretty cool. And as you talked about, which kind of is timely for me, you know, I've started the Streamers Over 30. I've been able to build a 6-figure business through teaching tennis online, which is a lot of fun. But you talk about how everything's fluid and how things are changing, that the people who used to, you know, be able to do things for movies and these big budgets, how now the internet is kind of like eating all that up and destroying it, basically. Now, one thing that I also start to see is that the traditional plays that work on the internet, they still work, but they tend to work. It tends to be even harder to get them to work. Like for instance, in my example, in my business, I'll make a video. I'll say, hey, if you want to learn more of that, whether it's the forehand or whatever, I'll give you even more free training on an email. And then they get on my email list, and then we sell like the paid course. And you know, as the internet gets more and more competitive, you know, people tend to open the emails less and click on the links less and pay less attention to you because everybody's grabbing for their attention. So I guess my question for you is, where do you see the puck going? Where is the puck going to go? Is there a new frontier where things are going to open up and maybe get a little easier? Or is it just going to get tougher and tougher and tougher to get people's attention?
Well, I don't think it's it's an interesting question, and the way you pose it, excuse me, is interesting. But I'll give you an example of someone who does kind of what you do, only it's not in sports, and they're a client of mine. It's called Grayscale Gorilla. You should look that up, or I'll send you the link when we're done here. And the guy that runs it is a guy named Nick Campbell. The way he does it is he sells plugins that his company makes and that other people make, but the way he drives the business is he does free tutorials for people that use the software. He's most famous for what's called Cinema 4D, which is a big program in the motion graphics. He's got probably 3, 4, 5, 600,000 followers, and he's got a lot of customers, and he does very well financially, both from the tutorials and basically from selling what are called plugins. I don't know if you're they're little gizmos that for a program, it'll make it do this better, you know. I have another guys that are in the same kind of work right now. It's called Learn Squared, and they sell high-end tutorials for people in the motion business. They get the best people in the business to do the tutorials, and they do pretty well. So again, you have to have something to sell. I mean, it's got to be, and you have to have a presence on the internet that isn't necessarily sales related. You have to build a following, and you're never going to make money from YouTube, but you have to have something to sell them. My advice would be, I don't know what else a tennis instructor could sell people, but you know, if you have something, it's, you know, in the old days it would be called back of the room. You know, Tony Robbins gets up there and tells you whatever he says. The back of the room's where all the books and the tapes are, you know. And so you have to, if you have something to tell them besides something that's esoteric, like a tutorial, because I'm guessing I could go on YouTube in 10 minutes, 300 people trying to teach me how to do just about anything, tennis included. So you have to have something special. It has to be a hook. That's just standard old marketing stuff. But yeah, it is changing, and it's the more you know your audience. The people that do the best in this are people that have a definable audience. Like Nick Campbell has a definable audience. Anyone who uses Cinema 4D is in his cohort, let's call it. In your case, it's pretty broad. Like, how do we really know who needs a tennis lesson? Take some time to figure that out. Does that make sense? So you're doing yours for everybody. The people that are most successful have narrowed their market down and said, this is who we're talking to. I think if you're broad, it's hard.
Yeah, well, with what we do is we basically are, the people are attracted to the YouTube tutorials, which first, we're not making money off YouTube. I don't know if you got, we're basically, that's our traffic. That's where we get
right
to find us. But our market is basically tennis players over the age of 50, typically men, and there are a certain skill set of rating, and they're looking to kind of get to the next level.
Right.
So, yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
If you can identify them, then you obviously you're doing decently. But yeah, it's as more and more people go online, it's going to become more and more difficult to get people's attention. My suggestion is always the same. Only communicate with your customers when you really have something to say. You get too many of these, you just get bombarded by stuff. I think from a marketing point of view, that's a mistake. When I get a certain email from somebody, if I know that they're not just sending me email to send me email, then I'll open it. But if it's just that everyday stuff, I don't bother. And I don't think, my average client gets 300 or 400 emails a day. I quit using emails. I use text now because I don't hear back from them for a month.
Right.
And they want to hear from me.
Yeah. Interesting. Yeah.
And I don't know what, and then I always have a joke with my clients when they're trying to sell and they're talking and everything like that. And I'll say, I think you can still call people on one of these. They go, what do you mean? I said, yeah, you could just maybe call and ask for the person. How about that?
Yeah. Yeah. It is.
The over 50 crowd doesn't have a problem with that, but the under 35 crowd, that's mysterious to them.
Yeah, it is. That's very interesting. And what you say too, your take is kind of interesting, like less content or emails versus more. And I think successful people do both. You have some people like I follow, I don't know if you know Frank Kern is, he talks about, sending more because people you're not going to stand out unless you are there in front of their face, as long as you have something good to say. And then, you kind of like making more of a premium value on the email. My concern or fear would be, well, if they have so much, how are they going to see it? How are they going to notice it? Well, they could miss that.
Well, a lot of it has to do with the content. If I send a letter, if I send an email, and I call it the slug line, the subject line, which is like a headline in the old days. You have to have something compelling to say.
Mm-hmm.
I'm 50 years old. I had diabetes and I lost my leg. I signed up for a lesson with Peter and I upped my ranking, 2 levels in 3 months of his tutorials. That's all you got to say. And you got a little video there of Frank or whoever, then I read it. But what most people don't get, they don't have anything to say.
Mm.
If you don't have anything to say,
don't say anything.
Don't say anything. Don't waste my time.
Sure.
I have an email in my, somewhere in my trail of emails I got. A young woman was selling for a client of mine, and she was persistent. She actually sent an email to the head, this person makes films and stuff, to the head of Amazon, the person who acquires the videos. And she got a response, which shocked the hell out of me.
Mm-hmm.
And basically, here's what he said. I'm not interested in the capabilities meeting. I'm not interested in, the general stuff. I have to get viewers for my movies. I'm very busy. If you have an idea of something that I can put on digital that's going to make people watch any one of my movies, let me know. That's the meeting I'm willing to take. Other than that, don't have time. Which was a gift. Because I've told all my clients that, telling you that, and it was a gift for her because she realized this idea of bombarding important people with meaningless messages is not only a waste of time, it turns them off.
Yeah, yeah.
They know that all you're doing is, it's like, I liken it to the person. Here's who had the strategy you're describing: guys selling toner on the phone. Remember those guys?
Mm-hmm.
Just hang up. Don't put yourself in. Have something to say. You're better off to deliver one important message a couple times a month or once a week than this broadcast. I'm probably talking out of my butt here. I'm losing my voice a little bit. Look, the people that do that are selling commodities. Don't allow yourself to be commodified. You're not a person who teaches tennis lessons. You're a person who improves people's tennis playing. There's a difference.
Yes.
And if you want to commodify yourself and just be one other person who's selling tennis lessons, to me, that's a mistake, unless you got big, big, deep pockets and you can just overwhelm the marketplace.
Uh-huh.
It's never a position a small, I'm assuming your business is small, that's never a position a small business person should ever put themselves in. Don't get tricked by commodity marketing, because unfortunately, what we see on television all the time, and we begin to think that's what the world is, it's all commodity. There, you ever go to the supermarket for yourself and look at the toothpaste? There's 52 brands. It's a commodity.
Yeah.
You don't know what to buy. If your wife buys it, you can't remember what you use. You just stand there and you look, like, don't put yourself in that. You want to be the person that sells something special. And if you're not,
that makes a lot of sense. That makes a lot of sense.
Here's what they say in LA: educate me or entertain me, or don't bother me.
Uh-huh.
If you can't educate me or entertain me, I'm not interested. I'm overwhelmed here with stuff. Sure. Everybody in town is overwhelmed with stuff.
Yeah.
So that's always my advice to small people. Have something to say, something to sell. I'll get this all the time. We send out 100 emails and we can get a response. And I'll look at the email. I said, who would respond to that? I mean, who you'd have to be an idiot to waste any time whatsoever on that. I mean, come on, guys. Because I use the test and you can use this, Peter. Would you open it?
Right.
If the answer is no, keep working.
Right. Very good. Very good.
This is what I do for a living.
Yeah. So I think this is a great way to kind of end today. So if I'm hearing you right, if someone does have something they want to get out into the world, make sure you really do your research and your homework and know that you're giving something to the world that's not going to be a waste of their time, because people don't have much time.
They have no time. If you send out an email that says free money, they'll open it. It has to be of value. If you're a tennis instructor and you're good at what you do, and I assume everybody's good at what they do until I discover they're not, you have to give me a solid reason why, if I'm 50 plus, I should sign up for your lessons. And I'm sure you have many stories you could tell.
Yeah.
And those are the stories that you need to tell. And people that want to learn to play tennis will pay attention to those stories. A 50-year-old plus will pay attention to that story.
Very, very cool.
But if they don't, if you don't have anything to say, pretty soon they're not going to open your email.
Yeah. Very, very good stuff. Excellent. Well, thank you so much for your time. I'm sure the people who are going to watch us are going to learn a lot, and I learned a lot myself. So thank you.
Well, put my email address on there, so if they want to do business, they'll write me.
We definitely will. We definitely will.
Dreams are so powerful. Don't underestimate them. They either make you or break you. Keep you up at night with excitement or disappointment thinking about what might have been. Most people give up on their dreams, thinking it's too big for them, that maybe their dream was made for someone else, or simply that it's too late to start. Here at Dreamers Over 30, we teach you it's never too late. Don't ever give up on your dreams, because your dreams, they're what you're made of. They either fill your soul with gratitude or eat away at it. So join us on our journey. I promise you, each and every episode, you're going to learn something new and be one step closer to your dreams coming true.